guys, this is Judy from Patterns for Pirates, and I'm gonna sew the high-low hem on the new oversized sweater pattern. I have a size 3 here. I have the main front and back together here, and it's inside out. I did it a little out of order so it doesn't have sleeves or anything yet, but that's the main front and the main back sewed together at the side seams and shoulders. Now I have two pieces, my front hemband and my back hemband. As you can see, the back one is taller. Both of them are going to get folded so that they are right sides together. And we're going to sew up these short sides with a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both the front and the back. And now I'm going to do my front piece. It's important to have an accurate seam allowance here because the two pieces are exactly the same width as the shirt. And so if you end up taking a smaller or a bigger seam allowance, they won't align perfectly. So now I'm just going to flip it right sides out. And I'm going to use my little bamboo stick here to give it a good, nice corner. Now I'm going to find the centers of both my bands and my shirt front and my shirt back. So I'm just going to fold and find the center. I'm going to mark it with a pin, a clip, a marking tool. Whatever your preference is. I'm going to do that on both bands. Okay, and I actually have a center notch on both my pieces because I tend to automatically cut a little notch on any of my pattern pieces that have a fold. So I did that here, and there is a little center notch on my front and my back to align. I like to keep my main front and back inside out. I'm going to start with the front piece, which is the shorter band piece, and I am just going to align it with that center notch and put a pin. And now I'm going to take my edge with the seam, my side, and I'm going to align it right to my side seam. And I'm going to put my pin vertically. And I'm going to do that on the other side. Aligning the edge of my band right to the seam. I'm going to repeat on the back band, lining the centers and then the side seams. So my front band and my back band should be butted up against each other at the side seams. And now I'm going to baste them there on my sewing machine. You can also hand baste here if you prefer that. Okay, hopefully that gives you a nice clear view of my sewing machine. I have my back band and my front band here. And they're butted up against each other, aligned at the side seam. And what I like to do is run 2 basting stitches, just like you would a gather, except for nothing's gathering here. It's just to hold it in place. I like to do one inside the seam allowance and outside the seam allowance, to make sure I am keeping my bands exactly where I want them. And what I do is I actually put the pin inside the band to hold it in place. I'll lift up my foot here and make sure this one's exactly where I want it. And I'm doing this one about 3/8 of an inch. So it will be just above my 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to do another one about 5/8 from the edge. So that will be just outside my seam allowance. And this time I'm just going to use my fingers. You could use a pin if you wanted to hold it in place here. I usually just use my fingers at this point since it's already basted here. And I just make sure they're nice and butted and exactly where I want them. And so, whew, let's see, there we go. So as you can see, they're butted up together. I have a basting line around 3/8 and then another basting line at 5/8. So my seam will be right in between those, and it should hold it in place for me perfectly while I'm serging around. You can also, of course, finish your band with a sewing machine with a stretch stitch. And I'm going to repeat the exact same process here, making sure they're aligned exactly how I want them. Going nice and slow. Oh, you know what? I forgot to change mine to a basting stitch. I forgot to lengthen. So that other one's going to be a little more difficult to get those seams out. That's okay. You really only will need to remove your second basting line since it will be below the seam allowance. The first one will get taken up in your seam allowance. So here we go. Again at 3/8 and 5/8, and my seam will be right in between there. This should hold it perfectly in place. They're nice and butted up against each other. It shouldn't move at all, and if it does, it'll be a very, very minuscule amount. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and at my serger, and I'm going to serge around the whole band. You shouldn't need to stretch anything here. The band's fit are the same width as your front and back shirt. I'm sorry, I'm covering it up a little bit. I'm just going to sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And when you get to your side seams, you might want to go a little bit slower, even though they're basted. Making sure to get a perfect seam allowance there. Okay. And I will show you before removing that basting stitch. So there is my final stitch. It's just above that 5/8 stitching. And now you can just remove that 5/8 basting stitch. And again, the 3/8 one has been taken up in the seam allowance, so I don't have to worry about removing that one. So here is my finished seam. There we go. They're nice and touching right at the seam, and then they will fall. And of course, you'll want to press your bands, and you want to press your seam allowance up. You can top stitch this seam allowance up if you prefer. And then here's my other one. This basting stitch will be a little bit harder for me to remove because I forgot to lengthen my stretch stitch here. I won't make you suffer through that with me. But again, all it needs is a press along the bands and a press along the seam. You want to press your seam up. And there we go. It's nice and simple once you just forbid yourself from skipping those basting stitches. Do not skip the basting stitches. They will make it much, much easier and quicker in the long run. It will hold it perfectly in place while you do your final stitch. And if it moves at all within that basting stitch, it's going to be a very, very minuscule amount. They should be butted right up against each other at the side seam. And now all this needs is a nice press around the bands and the seam, and you can top stitch this as well. I hope that was helpful, and I am glad to see everybody's finished oversized sweaters.